I have a lot of different series going on this channel, which is great in terms of having a big variety of kinds of characters I draw, different tones to stories I tell, and stuff like that. But it does also mean that sometimes a series that I like and my subscribers like can slip my mind for weeks, months, or even years at a time. So I figured with so many people enjoying my Ninjago superhero series right now, plus with lots of people asking me why I haven't gotten to characters like Kai and Garmadon yet, I figured I should just jump right into episode 3. Same shtick as the last 2 episodes, putting the characters in Marvel, DC, My Hero Academia, and I hope you all enjoy. Let's go! Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show. Every master of the mystic arts knows the tale of the Ancient One. She watched over our world for centuries as the leader of Kamar-Taj, and helped bring many new heroic warriors into their ranks, while she was the Sorcerer Supreme, including the man who would one day replace her, Dr. Stephen Strange. But the part many tend to forget about her tale is that she once had a brother, who very well could have become the Sorcerer Supreme himself, if he'd not been led down a dark path by the Master of the Dark Dimension, Dormammu. As a child, the Ancient One and her brother, Garmadon, trained together to master the mystic arts. They both showed immense promise, though their father did push them quite hard, and rarely showed satisfaction with their progress. Eventually, they were accepted to train in Kamar-Taj with other aspiring sorcerers. They were told for their first years in training that they were not to leave the grounds of Kamar-Taj, as now that they had entered these hallowed grounds, minions of Dormammu would be seeking them to try and sway them to his dark ways, so they could grant him entrance to our dimension. Though Garmadon didn't heed the threats. After learning how to use a sling ring to create portals to wherever he pleased, Garmadon, in secret, created a gateway outside Kamar-Taj's walls to explore the area surrounding. There were shops and bustling civilians, and it was a pleasant break from training, until he felt something bite into his ankle. Through the moving crowds around him, he just caught a glimpse of a snake slithering away from him. He didn't feel ill, and soon simply thought nothing of it. But after he returned to Kamar-Taj, he started having strange dreams. Dreams of a large purple face luring him towards promises of untold power. For years, Garmadon did his best to ignore these and continue his training. He was progressing well, but the Ancient One far more so. And buzz started to stir that she was being considered to one day replace the Sorcerer Supreme, a position that Garmadon desperately wanted for himself. Garmadon grew envious and angry. The face in his dreams started swaying him to steal forbidden books from the library of Kamar-Taj to learn about dark forms of magic that could help him surpass his sister. As it eventually became officially proclaimed that the Ancient One would take the place of Sorcerer Supreme, Garmadon was swayed to steal an ancient artifact from Kamar-Taj, the Eye of Agamotto, to use and prove he truly was a more fitting successor. He stole the eye, but had been curiously followed by his sister, who immediately confronted him. She tried to talk him down from his anger and envy, but Garmadon had been pulled too far into the dark, and he attacked her. The Ancient One only intended to incapacitate him, but as Garmadon used more and more dark magic, she had to increase the severity of her spells, until one struck him directly and lethally. Garmadon seemed to have died, as his body collapsed in on itself in a purple mass of smoke and flames. But because of the cursed bite he'd received, his death was not truly his end. He was instead transported to the Dark Dimension in a warped, demonic version of his own body, where he finally met the face that had appeared to him in his dreams for so long, Dormammu. An interdimensional monstrosity who craved to enter our world and take it for his own. Dormammu promised Garmadon that now, in his own dimension, Dormammu could imbue his disciple with far more power. Power that he could use to one day return to Earth. With the might of the Dark Dimension fueling him, not the Ancient One nor any she'd train under her would ever be able to rival Garmadon's might again. Or so he was led to believe. Even in his early days when most saw the Batman as a dangerous vigilante, Harumi loved and idolized him. Growing up in a poor family in Gotham, her parents were constantly in fear of some maniacal killer kicking down their door and slaughtering them. But Harumi believed with the Batman watching over the city, that would never happen to her loved ones. As time went on, some others would start to see the Batman as a hero as well. He'd even acquire new allies, such as Robin, who'd go on to become Nightwing, Batgirl, and all the while Harumi continued to praise the Bat and all those who fought alongside him. Until the night of the Arkham breakout. Only days after the Batman had finally locked away the worst monster in the city, the Joker, the crazed jester was able to initiate a breakout. Arkham Asylum housed the worst of the worst criminals, and in one night all of them were loosed back into the city. Dozens of innocents died that night as villains ravaged the streets. But even as it occurred, and her parents were barricading their doors, Harumi wasn't concerned. She knew Batman would keep her and her family safe. But she was wrong. The Joker himself smashed through her family's window, and for nothing more than a tactic to rile up the Bat chasing him, Joker shot both her parents on his way through their home, cackling as he did. Batman furiously continued after the Joker out of their home and back into the Gotham streets, not having seen Harumi, so leaving her in her now shattered world. There was still some glimmer of hope in her that Batman would at least be able to catch and kill the Joker, but that was snuffed out when Harumi discovered that Batman had caught the foul jester and simply locked him away again, only for him to eventually escape once more and even kill Batman's own sidekick with a crowbar. And even still, the Bat refused to kill the Joker. Harumi grew bitter and angry. She'd been adopted by an incredibly wealthy family, one of the founding families of Gotham, the Elliots, so from a distance her life would appear to be a glamorous upgrade from the one she'd been living. But things were far from how they appeared. The Elliots had essentially adopted the poor orphan as a PR stunt to make themselves look better, and didn't really put much time into raising Harumi. She became very quiet and simply spent her time plotting on what she'd do with all the wealth she'd inherit from her new family, perhaps even using it to find and reveal Batman's identity someday. Until she was struck with new inspiration. A new hero started popping up in the papers in Gotham, one who was killing infamous mobsters and gang leaders, and who even got very close to publicly killing the Joker, only unsuccessful because Batman had stopped him to once again continue the futile cycle of locking the Joker away. People started calling this new hero the Red Hood. This was a hero Harumi felt she could truly praise. He was doing what really needed to be done, and so Harumi started training herself in combat, hiring the best trainers in Gotham with her family's vast wealth, to one day fight alongside the Red Hood. But after a few years of praising his work, she once again became disenchanted with her hero. Red Hood was soon publicly seen working alongside the Bat and his other allies, and was no longer using lethal force, despite it having been so much more effective. Harumi knew something must have gone wrong. Whatever Batman had done to convince Red Hood to no longer kill, she had to fix him, by any means necessary. She had herself made her own supersuit and gadgets, and started going out in the night as a vigilante, though not killing yet. Eventually, this put her on the radar of the Bat family, and they were impressed with her work. She admitted who she was, fought alongside them, gained their trust, and eventually found out the true identity of her once hero, Red Hood. She was shocked to discover that he had been the very Robin that the Joker had once killed, brought back to life by a man named Ra's al Ghul, using the power of something called a Lazarus Pit. It had revived Red Hood, but also driven him to great anger that led him down his more lethal vigilante path. He'd eventually been convinced by Batman to stop his killing ways, but this knowledge gave Harumi exactly what she needed to know. She now had a new mission. Find a way to get Red Hood back to the Lazarus Pit, have him bathe in its waters once more, and hope that would return him to being the hero she'd seen him as for so many years. It would take more time for her to find out how exactly to put this plan in motion, especially considering she had no idea how to get to Ra's al Ghul's fortress. but one person in the Bat family knew more about it than any of them. The youngest member of the Bat family, Batman's own son, Damian Wayne, was the grandson of Ra's al Ghul, and had been raised in close proximity to him and the Lazarus Pits. Harumi started feigning interest in Damian and grew closer and closer to him, all in an effort to find out how to return her hero, Red Hood, to what she saw as his former murderous glory. For this next story with Kai, I figured since I've already told a version of his origin story adapted into My Hero Academia when I did Nia in the first episode of this series, I thought I'd continue that and adapt a different part of his life. I had an idea that I figured would fit well into the My Hero Academia universe. Oh, and by the way, we're still set to reboot Pokemon as superheroes when the channel hits 500,000 subscribers, and that is very closely coming up. Might even get to that before the year is out. Okay, anyway, let's finally get to Kai, shall we? Kai was very happy when his sister Nia was accepted to UA High a year after him. They'd both been inspired to apply after the great hero All Might saved their village where they'd temporarily lived and run their late parents' blacksmith shop. While it took Nia an extra year to be accepted, they were both now on a path to becoming great heroes. They believed they were doing their deceased parents proud, but it turned out that their parents had never actually suffered the fate they believed. One of the main threats on the radar of all heroes was the League of Villains, and their inhuman muscle, the Nomu. It was still unclear how these artificially constructed superhumans were being made, but what was clear was that they truly were creations of the League of Villains, not genuine born beings in their own right. Eventually, it was discovered that the League was working with a villain named Dr. Kyuta Garaki, and that he was likely the one constructing the mindless, superpowered brutes. When this information got to Kai and the other students at UA High, they were obviously curious to learn more about this man. When Kai looked him up, he quickly realized he recognized this doctor. For a short while, Garaki had lived in Kai's village under a different name before Kai and Nia's parents had died. He'd run a small museum in town, though nobody ever really saw him working at it. He was a very private and secretive man, and yet Kai's parents had befriended him just shortly before their disappearance. The museum had burned down while Kai and Nia's parents were inside visiting Garaki, and while no bodies were found, they were still presumed dead. Now Kai suspected that perhaps his parents had discovered Garaki was a villain, and so he'd killed them to keep them quiet. But he needed to know for sure. While Kai was doing his hero agency internship, he was able to get word of a rumored facility where the Nomu were being made. That night, he silently snuck into the place in his hero attire and found the rumors were true. Nomu were indeed inside being made there, held in massive steel tanks surrounded by whirring machinery. Kai quietly lurked through the lab, trying to find Garaki or anything he could about his parents. But he hadn't truly been expecting to find his parents. Both of them were there, alive, tired and haggard, but working on the machines that contained the Nomu. Enraged to see that they were alive and working for the League of Villains, Kai attacked them both. He of course had inherited his fire manipulation quirk from his father, as Nia had her water powers from her mother, so they were well able to protect themselves. And despite not having seen him for years, and Kai wearing a mask and hero garb, they were soon able to piece together that this was their son. They stopped fighting and told him what had happened. Garaki had built the museum in their village as a front, and was working on his Nomu formulas beneath it. Once he cracked the code, he needed people to forge the mechanisms in which the Nomu could be made. He'd seen how skilled of blacksmiths and mechanics Kai's parents were, so he eventually showed them what he was doing. He then blackmailed them both, saying that if they didn't help him create the Nomu, then he'd have Kai and Nia killed. They of course accepted, and when he eventually needed to move his work to a new location, he faked all 3 of their deaths, and the parents were forced to go with him to ensure Kai and Nia stayed safe. It was a hard thing for Kai to process, but when he was finally able to accept it, he was just grateful to have them both back. Though they couldn't leave just yet. Kai relayed this information back to Nia and the pro-heroes. He He was of course in some trouble for breaking into the suspected Nomu site without a full hero license. But this was eventually waved away, as having two allies on the inside, in Kai and Mia's parents, meant the heroes finally had a significant one-up against the League of Villains. Pythor P Chumsworth didn't realize his simple act of teaming up with some other known criminals with snake-like abilities would eventually lead to an entire villain society being formed. All he was looking to do was take down the meddling Captain America and his ally Falcon. They were getting too hot on Pythor's tail during his latest crime spree, and so Pythor had the idea to strike first and go directly after these heroes. Pythor had been born with the mutation to look like a large purple snake. He had no legs, a snake-like head, and boasted impressive speed, strength, and the ability to turn invisible. But in spite of his mutant abilities, he had never truly trained in fighting, and figured he could lure others into doing his fighting for him. He allied himself with the villains of Viper, Eel, and Cobra, and convinced them to go with him to directly attack Captain America and Falcon, claiming they could work well together as a unified Serpent Squad. They agreed, assuming Pythor would be an able ally in the fight to come. Unfortunately, when the fight was well underway, Pythor quickly saw that Falcon and Cap still had an upper hand. Pythor decided to turn invisible and quietly slip away from the fight. Of course, the squad soon noticed Pythor's absence from the battle and managed to escape the fight themselves. They then hunted down Pythor to teach him a lesson for abandoning them. They beat him quite badly, bound him, and left him outside a S.H.I.E.L.D. outpost, even covering him in white paint to ensure he couldn't disappear before being arrested. He was then sent to the maximum security prison, the Raft. His sentence was meant to be 25 years, but after only 5, he was freed by an unexpected ally. The Winter Soldier, once known as Bucky Barnes, Captain America's former ally during World War II, broke into the Raft to free Pythor. This occurred still during the period when Barnes was brainwashed and being used as an assassin, and his controllers were interested in allying themselves with a group that had blossomed from Pythor's originally created team. Since his imprisonment, the Serpent Squad had grown to a whole Serpent Society full of dozens of snake-themed villains. Once free, Pythor was instructed to infiltrate the team, regain their trust, and eventually convince them to align themselves with the Winter Soldier's controllers. Pythor agreed to help, though he had no intention to actually do so. He went to the Serpent Society, led now by Viper, who was obviously not open to accepting this former traitor into their ranks, but Pythor was nothing if not deceptively convincing. He eventually wore Viper down through talking with other members of the society and was accepted into their ranks. Over the next few months, he gained their trust and even manipulated most members into thinking he was a better suited leader for the team. As Pythor took command of the Serpent Society, the Winter Soldier then came to him, looking for Pythor to complete the terms of their agreement. Pythor instead had the Serpent Society attack Barnes and leave him bound for S.H.I.E.L.D. to apprehend. Pythor then believed himself ultimately victorious, ready to lead the Serpent Society on all manner of glorious heists and misadventures. Though little did he realize in allowing the Winter Soldier to be taken in by S.H.I.E.L.D., he'd set in motion Barnes' rehabilitation to once more become an ally of Captain America. It wouldn't be long before Captain America, Falcon, and the Winter Soldier would be on the move to finally take down Pythor and the Serpent Society for good.
Well, there we go. We've got the most requested characters all done now. I mean, there are still some other ones I saw kicking around a bunch of people had asked for Woo, so it is possible we get a 4th episode of this, but like I said, it might be fun now to branch out into other Ninjago stuff the next time I use the characters. So give me some suggestions for what you'd like to see me do with Ninjago characters in the comments. I think they would work really well in my Fantasy Armor series, but that might be a little bit too similar visually to this. Maybe making them into some kind of monsters could be fun. Just give me all the ideas you got in the comments. And of course, if you're new to the channel, I'll link the previous 2 episodes in this series. But I also have tons of other superhero-related episodes on here that you might enjoy. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note. And the thought I want to leave people with today is that when you have an idea of what you want to do for your dream job, just start experimenting with it as soon as possible. I say that because if I could have waved a magic wand in 2012, I would have made myself a director for Marvel Studios. But then I went to film school and directed a bunch of projects with bigger casts and bigger crews, and I realized I didn't like directing. Then eventually I went on to try writing a book series. I realized that's not what I wanted to do because I still wanted to write stories that I could produce faster. And eventually I ended up figuring out this, which is my dream job, but there were a lot of failed attempts along the way that all got me a little bit closer. So the sooner you start experimenting with what you think you want to do, the sooner you will find the thing that you really do want to do. I mean, maybe you get it right off the bat, and that's great. But still, the sooner you start experimenting, the sooner you know. I hope that's inspiring to someone out there. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Friday.